Admiral Zeth Carr stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of the hegemony's most advanced battle station. The three-dimensional map showed the spiral arm of the galaxy where a new species had recently emerged from their home system. These humans had been nothing more than a curiosity just 50 cycles ago, but now they represented what the Hegemony Council deemed an existential threat. The Vraxian Admiral's 6 arms moved in precise patterns as he manipulated the display, zooming in on the Sol system. His compound eyes, evolved over millions of years to detect the slightest movement across multiple spectrums of light, focused intently on the data streams flowing across his vision. The intelligence reports were troubling, to say the least. Computer, display Terran expansion timeline. Zeth Carr commanded, his voice carrying the natural authority of one who had conquered 17 star systems in the name of the hegemony. The hologram shifted, showing a time-lapse of human expansion over the past 20 standard cycles. What the Admiral saw defied everything the hegemony understood about species development. Most civilizations took thousands of cycles to move from their first orbital flight to establishing permanent colonies on other worlds. The humans had accomplished this in less than 100 of their local years. Impossible, muttered Subcommander Thexilla, her mandibles clicking in agitation. The insectoid officer had served under Zeth Carr for 30 cycles, and he had never seen her display such obvious concern. The projected growth rate suggests they'll have colonized 50 systems within the next 10 cycles. No species develops that quickly without external assistance. Zeth Carr's primary arms folded behind his back, while his secondary arms continued to manipulate the display controls. Yet our deep space reconnaissance confirms these projections. Show me the military assessment, computer. The hologram transformed again, now displaying what appear to be crude human warships. To most observers, they would look primitive compared to hegemony vessels. The humans still relied heavily on kinetic weapons, chemical propulsion systems, and basic energy shields. Their ships were angular, utilitarian things that looked more like flying toolboxes than proper warships. Their technology is at least 3,000 cycles behind our own, Thexilla observed, her confidence returning. Kinetic projectiles against plasma barriers? Chemical rockets against gravitic drives? Their largest vessels barely qualify as destroyer class by our standards. But Zeth Carr had not risen to his position by underestimating enemies. He had spent considerable time studying the data from their first contact with humanity, and what he had learned troubled him deeply. Computer, display the new Geneva incident. The hologram now showed a space station orbiting a world in the outer reaches of human space. According to the reports, this had been humanity's first encounter with an alien civilization, specifically a raiding party of Kethmori pirates. The Kethmori were known throughout the galaxy as savage but predictable enemies. They struck fast, took what they wanted, and disappeared before local defenses could respond. The Kethmori attacked with a standard raiding formation. Zeth Carr narrated as the display showed 3 sleek pirate vessels approaching the human station. 12 ships against 1 orbital platform, and a handful of human patrol craft. By all tactical projections, the humans should have been overwhelmed within minutes. The battle began to play out in the hologram. The Kethmori ships, each one significantly larger and more advanced than the human defenders, opened fire with plasma cannons and boarding pods. Their tactics had worked against dozens of other species over the centuries. But the humans did something unexpected. Instead of attempting to flee or negotiate, they fought with a ferocity that shocked even the battle-hardened Kethmori. Human defenders rammed their small patrol ships directly into pirate vessels, sacrificing themselves to cripple enemy drives. When Kethmori boarding parties breached the station, they found humans who continued fighting even after sustaining injuries that would have incapacitated most species. The Kethmori eventually withdrew, Zeth Carr continued, but not before losing 8 of their 12 ships. They reported that the humans fought like possessed demons and showed no regard for their own survival when protecting their civilians. Taxilia shifta uncomfortably. Fanatical behavior is not uncommon among primitive species. The hegemony has encountered it before. Yes, but observe what happened next. The hologram fast-forwarded 3 local cycles. Now it showed a massive human fleet emerging from hyperspace at the edge of Keth Mori territory. Where once the humans had possessed only a handful of patrol craft, they now deployed hundreds of warships. The vessels were still crude by galactic standards, but their numbers were staggering. In less than 3 cycles, they had built this fleet, Zethkar said quietly. They tracked down the Keth Mori to their home system and engaged them in battle. The pirates had numerical superiority and better technology, yet the humans systematically destroyed every Keth Mori vessel in the system. The battle footage showed human ships absorbing tremendous damage while continuing to fight. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as projectiles. When their ships were disabled, escape pods would ram into enemy vessels and deploy boarding parties armed with primitive chemical explosives and kinetic weapons. The humans didn't just defeat the Keth Mori, Zethkar continued. They eliminated them entirely as a space-faring civilization. Every ship, every orbital platform, every space-based installation. They left the planet intact, but removed every trace of Keth Mori presence in space. Fexilla's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. That level of systematic destruction, it suggests a coordinated military doctrine rather than random aggression. Precisely. Zethkar manipulated the controls to show intelligence reports from across the galaxy. In the 20 cycles since that incident, 17 different pirate groups, 3 slaving cartels, and 2 minor warlords have all attempted to prey upon human settlements or shipping. None of them exist anymore. The hologram displayed the expansion of human territory over those same 20 cycles. Each time their borders expanded, it was following the complete elimination of some hostile force. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were systematically removing threats from their vicinity. But, Admiral, Fexilla said, clearly struggling with the implications, their technology remains primitive. Our vessels are faster, more heavily armed, and protected by barriers that their kinetic weapons cannot penetrate. Surely a coordinated assault by the hegemony's battle fleets would what? Zethkar interrupted. Computer, display tactical analysis of human ship construction. The hologram zoomed in on a human battleship, revealing its internal structure. What they saw defied conventional military engineering principles. Look at this design, Zethkar pointed with one of his secondary arms. Redundant systems everywhere. Triple redundant life support. Backup power systems for the backup power systems, multiple bridges, distributed command structures. This ship could lose 70% of its mass and still remain functional. He manipulated the display to show a cross-section of a hegemony cruiser for comparison. The alien vessel was elegant, efficient, and optimized for maximum performance with minimum resources. Our ships are superior in every measurable way, he continued. But they're also precision instruments. Damage to key systems renders them inoperable. Human ships are built like siege fortresses. Crude, but nearly impossible to disable quickly. Fexilla studied the comparison carefully. Their manufacturing capabilities must be enormous to build such wasteful designs on a large scale. Computer, display human industrial output projections. The numbers that appeared in the hologram caused both officers to fall silent for several long moments. According to their intelligence, humanity was currently producing warships at a rate that exceeded the combined output of the entire hegemony. This cannot be accurate, Fexilla finally said. No single species could possibly. The data has been verified by 3 separate intelligence networks, Zethkar said grimly. The humans have converted their entire industrial base to military production. Every factory, every resource extraction facility, every orbital platform is now dedicated to building warships and weapons. The hologram showed satellite footage of human worlds. Where once there had been cities, farms, and civilian infrastructure, now there were massive shipyards, weapons factories, and military training facilities. The humans had transformed their entire civilization into a military machine. But why? Fexilla asked. We have made no hostile moves toward them. The hegemony has not even initiated formal contact. Zethkar's expression grew even more troubled. Because they know we're coming. He manipulated the display to show long-range sensor data from the edges of human space. The humans had deployed a network of monitoring stations and automated probes throughout their territory and beyond. Their surveillance coverage extended far into what the hegemony considered its own sphere of influence. They have been watching us for cycles, Zethkar explained, monitoring our ship movements, studying our technology, analyzing our tactics. They know the size of our fleets, the locations of our major bases, and the disposition of our forces throughout this entire sector. The implications were staggering. The humans had been preparing for a war that hadn't even been declared yet. Computer, display the Terran force projection model. The hologram now showed what appeared to be the human military strategic planning for a conflict with the hegemony. The model was disturbingly accurate in its assessment of hegemony capabilities and deployment patterns. They planned to use their numerical superiority and expendable ship designs to overwhelm our fleets through attrition, Zethkar analyzed. They know they cannot match our technology directly, so they intend to simply outproduce and out-sacrifice us. The model showed human fleets engaging hegemony forces in multiple sectors simultaneously, using their crude but numerous ships to tie down superior alien vessels, while follow-up waves delivered killing blows through sheer weight of numbers. Admiral, Fexilla said carefully, perhaps we should reconsider our approach to these humans. If they are this well-prepared and this determined, perhaps diplomatic contact. No, Zethkar's voice carried the finality of absolute authority. The Council has already decided. The human expansion rate threatens the stability of this entire galactic arm. Their military buildup suggests aggressive intentions regardless of their current defensive posture. They must be stopped before they become too powerful to contain. He turned away from the hologram to face his subordinate directly. Besides, our analysis shows a critical weakness in their preparations. For all their industrial might and tactical planning, they remain limited by their primitive, faster-than-light travel technology. Their ships require nearly twice as long to traverse the same distances as ours. The hologram shifted to show deployment schedules for both civilizations. While the humans could build ships faster, the hegemony could move their existing fleets into position much more quickly. We will assemble the Grand Fleet, Zethkar announced. Every battleship, every carrier, every dreadnought from the core worlds to the outer rim. We will strike at their heart before they can fully mobilize their scattered forces. Fexilla's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement, but her posture suggested continued unease. Admiral, the logistics of assembling such a force will require at least 6 cycles. Our intelligence suggests the humans will detect our preparations long before we are ready to launch the assault. Let them detect us, Zethkar said with grim satisfaction. Let them see the true might of the hegemony approaching their worlds. Fear will work in our favor. Perhaps some of them will surrender rather than face total annihilation. But even as he spoke those words, Zethkar felt a nagging doubt. Everything he had learned about humanity suggested they did not understand the concept of surrender. They had never retreated from a battle, never negotiated from a position of weakness, never showed mercy to enemies who had threatened their people. Begin the mobilization orders, he commanded, pushing those doubts aside. Contact every fleet commander, every sector admiral, every system defense coordinator. The hegemony has tolerated this human expansion long enough. As Fexilla left to carry out his orders, Zethkar remained alone with the holographic display. He manipulated the controls one final time, bringing up the projected casualties for the coming war. Even using the most conservative estimates, the numbers were staggering. The hegemony would win. He was certain of that, but The cost would be higher than any military operation in their long history. The humans would not go quietly into extinction. They would fight with every ship, every weapon, every life they possessed. And when their ships were destroyed and their worlds burned, they would probably find new ways to continue fighting. But the alternative was worse. If the humans were allowed to continue their expansion and militarization unchecked, they would eventually pose an existential threat to the hegemony itself. Better to pay the price now, while victory was still assured, than to face them when they had grown even stronger. Admiral Zethkar began composing his report to the Council, outlining the mobilization plan that would bring together the largest military force in galactic history. The humans had impressed him with their determination and resourcefulness, but they were still a young species playing at war against opponents who had been conquering civilization since before humanity had discovered fire. The Grand Fleet would teach them the difference between survival and supremacy. It would be a lesson they would not live long enough to forget. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the UHSV Indomitable, watching the impossible sight unfold before her. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum viewports, she could see the largest concentration of military vessels in human history. Ships stretched to the horizon in every direction, their running lights creating a constellation of artificial stars against the black of space. The irony was not lost on her. While the aliens were assembling their own massive fleet to destroy humanity, the humans had been doing exactly the same thing. The difference was that humanity's fleet had been ready for months, waiting in the shadow of Proxima Centauri for the enemy to make their move. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Marcus Rodriguez from behind her. The man had served as her chief of staff for 3 years now, and she could read the tension in his voice even without turning around. Long-range sensors are picking up the final elements of the hegemony fleet moving into position. They're larger than our most pessimistic projections. Chun turned away from the viewport to face the tactical display that dominated the center of the observation deck. The holographic representation showed both fleets in detail, and the sight was sobering even for someone who had helped plan humanity's response. The alien fleet consisted of over 8,000 vessels, ranging from massive dreadnoughts the size of small cities down to fast attack craft that still outmassed most human destroyers. Every ship represented the pinnacle of technology developed over millennia by a civilization that had conquered half the galaxy. How many of their big ships? Shin asked, though she already knew the answer. 237 dreadnoughts for 112 heavy cruisers and 856 light cruisers, Rodriguez replied grimly. The rest are destroyers and support vessels, but even their smallest ships outgun our battleships. Chin nodded, her expression betraying nothing of the cold calculation running through her mind. The numbers were daunting, but numbers had never been the deciding factor in war. Human history was full of examples where smaller, supposedly weaker forces had defeated larger, more advanced enemies through superior tactics, determination, and willingness to pay any price for victory. And our fleet, 32,000 vessels, and counting, Rodriguez said, and Chun could hear the pride in his voice despite their desperate situation. Admiral Morrison's construction fleets finished the last of the emergency builds yesterday. We've got quantity on our side, if nothing else. Chun walked to the tactical display and began manipulating the controls with practiced ease. The representation zoomed in to show the composition of the human fleet. Where the alien fleet was an elegant formation of advanced warships, the human fleet looked more like a swarm of angry hornets. The backbone of their force consisted of 12,000 kamikaze-class destroyers, ships that had been designed and built with one purpose in mind, to close with enemy vessels and detonate their enhanced fusion reactors in devastating proximity explosions. Each one carried enough antimatter to vaporize a city, all contained in barely stable magnetic bottles that could be released at a moment's notice. Supporting them were 8,000 swarm-class frigates, small, fast ships whose primary weapons were clouds of self-guided kinetic penetrators. Each frigate could release thousands of these projectiles in a matter of seconds, creating a deadly hail of metal that could overwhelm even advanced defensive systems through sheer volume. The heavy units consisted of 6,000 Fortress-class battleships, massive constructs that looked more like flying space stations than traditional warships. Each one bristled with every weapon humanity could devise: railguns, missile tubes, plasma cannons, laser arrays, and exotic weapons that pushed the boundaries of known physics. The aliens probably think we're insane, Chun mused, studying the tactical display. Building ships designed to destroy themselves, weapons that violate half the known laws of war, engines that should theoretically be impossible to operate safely. Are we insane, Admiral? Rodriguez asked quietly. Chun considered the question seriously. By the standards of galactic civilization, humanity probably did appear unhinged. Most species fought wars with careful calculations of acceptable losses and strategic objectives. They followed established rules of engagement and sought to minimize damage to valuable infrastructure and populations. Humanity had thrown all of those conventions out the nearest airlock. When faced with an enemy that outmatched them technologically, they had decided to outmatch their enemies in sheer determination and willingness to sacrifice. Every human ship was crewed by volunteers who understood they might not survive the coming battle. Every weapon system pushed performance far beyond safe operational parameters. Every tactical doctrine assumed that victory was more important than survival. Maybe, Chun finally answered, but sometimes insanity is the only rational response to an impossible situation. The observation deck's communications system chimed, indicating an incoming priority transmission. Chun moved to the command console and activated the holographic projector. The familiar figure of President Elizabeth Warren materialized before them, broadcasting from the emergency command bunker beneath the ruins of Geneva. Admiral Chun, the president began without preamble. I've just finished speaking with the other fleet commanders. The alien fleet is beginning to move toward our outer colonies. How long until they reach Earth? Chun manipulated the tactical display to show projected movement patterns. Based on their observed acceleration and our intelligence on their faster-than-light capabilities, approximately 14 standard days, Madam President. They're taking their time, probably expecting us to panic and make mistakes. Are we going to give them what they expect? No, ma'am. Operation Fallen Angel remains on schedule. The moment they enter the Tau Ceti system, we begin the first phase. President Warren nodded grimly. Operation Fallen Angel was humanity's response to the coming invasion, and it represented the most audacious military gambit in human history. Instead of waiting for the aliens to attack Earth's defenses, humanity would take the fight to them using tactics no sane military planner would ever consider. Admiral, the president continued, I need to ask you the same question I've asked every military commander in the past 6 months. Are you absolutely certain this is our only option? The casualties will be catastrophic. Chun finished. We estimate a 90% casualty rate in the opening phases alone. But, Madam President, the alternative is the complete extinction of our species. The aliens aren't coming here to conquer us or enslave us. Their own communications make it clear that they intend to eliminate humanity entirely. The president was quiet for a long moment, her weathered face showing the strain of the past year. When the first alien fleet movements had been detected, she had authorized the most massive mobilization in human history. Every resource, every factory, every available person had been dedicated to preparing for this moment. Very well, Admiral. You have full authorization to proceed with Operation Fallen Angel. May God have mercy on us all. The transmission ended, leaving Chun and Rodriguez alone with the weight of what was about to unfold. In less than 2 weeks, the largest space battle in galactic history would begin, and its outcome would determine whether humanity survived as a species or joined the long list of civilizations that have been erased by the hegemony. Sir, Rodriguez said carefully, the crew has been asking about our chances. What should I tell them? Chen turned back to the viewport, looking out at the vast human fleet. Each ship represented the hopes and fears of billions of people, the culmination of humanity's greatest technological and industrial achievement. They were crewed by alien standards, built quickly and without regard for efficiency or elegance. But they were human ships, crewed by human beings who understood exactly what was at stake. Tell them the truth, Chen said finally. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy with thousands of years of military experience. By every logical analysis, we should lose this battle decisively. She paused, watching a squadron of kamikaze-class destroyers practice their attack formations. The small ships moved with deadly precision, their crews having drilled the same maneuvers thousands of times until they could execute them perfectly even under the most extreme conditions. But also tell them that logic has never been humanity's strong suit. We've never been the strongest species on our planet, or the fastest, or the smartest. But we've always been the most stubborn. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that should have wiped us out completely. We've turned deserts into gardens and oceans into highways. We've split the atom and touched the stars. Rodriguez was nodding now, understanding where she was going. The aliens think they know what they're facing, Chen continued. They've studied our ships, analyzed our tactics, calculated our capabilities. They think they understand human warfare because they've seen us fight pirates and raiders. But they've never seen what happens when you threaten to exterminate us entirely. She gestured toward the fleet spread out before them. Every person out there knows that if we lose this battle, there won't be another chance. There's no retreat, no surrender, no negotiated peace. It's victory or extinction. The communications system chimed again, this time with an incoming message from the fleet's intelligence division. Chen accepted the transmission, and Commander Sarah Kim's face appeared in the hologram. Admiral, we're receiving confirmation that the alien fleet has begun their final approach. They're moving in standard battle formation, exactly as our projections indicated. It appears they're planning a straightforward assault on our defensive positions. Chen smiled grimly. Perfect. They still think we're going to fight a conventional defensive battle. How long until our deep space reconnaissance assets confirm their exact course? 6 hours, ma'am. Once we have their trajectory locked in, we can begin the first phase of Fallen Angel. Excellent. Signal all fleet commanders to begin final preparations. I want every ship ready to move within 4 hours. As Kim's transmission ended, Rodriguez moved to stand beside Chen at the viewport. Admiral, there's something I need to ask. The battle plans call for the Indomitable to lead the final assault wave. Are you certain that's wise? If we lose the fleet command... Captain, Chen interrupted gently, in approximately 72 hours, either humanity will have won the most decisive victory in our history, or our species will cease to exist. Under those circumstances, traditional command structures become somewhat irrelevant. She turned to face him directly. Besides, the crew needs to see that their leaders are willing to take the same risks they are. How can I ask 32,000 ship crews to sacrifice their lives if I'm not willing to do the same? Rodriguez nodded, though she could see he wasn't entirely comfortable with the decision. But then, again, none of them were comfortable with any aspect of what they were about to attempt. Operation Fallen Angel required them to abandon every established principle of naval warfare and replace them with tactics that bordered on the suicidal. The plan was elegantly simple in its audacity. Instead of waiting for the alien fleet to attack human colonies and then fighting a series of defensive actions, humanity would allow the aliens to penetrate deep into human space before springing a carefully prepared trap. The alien fleet would find human colonies apparently defenseless, protected only by automated orbital platforms and skeleton defensive forces. Confident in their superiority, they would spread out to attack multiple targets simultaneously, dividing their massive fleet into smaller, more manageable formations. That was when the human fleet would strike. Emerging from hyperspace at multiple points around the alien formations, human ships would engage in close-quarters combat, where their numerical superiority and expendable designs would be most effective. The aliens' advanced technology would matter less when human ships could ram their vessels or detonate themselves at point-blank range. It was a plan that could only work once, against an enemy that didn't expect it. But if it worked, it would cripple the alien fleet so badly that humanity would have time to prepare for the next phase of the war. Signal the fleet, Chen ordered. All ships are to begin final weapon checks and crew preparations. In 72 hours, we're going to show these aliens why humanity has never been conquered by anyone. As Rodriguez moved to carry out her orders, Chen remained at the viewport, watching her fleet prepare for what might be the last battle humanity would ever fight. The odds were against them. The enemy was superior in every conventional measure, and victory would require sacrifices that would haunt the survivors for generations. But they would fight anyway, because that was what humans did when faced with extinction. They would fight with every weapon they possessed, every tactic they could devise, and every ounce of courage they could summon. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. Admiral Zethkar felt a deep satisfaction as his massive fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. The sight before him confirmed everything his intelligence reports had suggested about human military capabilities. A handful of orbital defense platforms hung in space around Earth, their weapon signatures barely registering on his sensors. A few dozen human warships patrolled the outer planets, but they were already beginning to withdraw toward the inner system in what appeared to be a panicked retreat. Pathetic, Subcommander Thexilla observed from her position at the tactical station. They're running before we've even fired a shot. Perhaps the humans are not as fanatical as our intelligence suggested. Zethkar nodded, though something about the human deployment bothered him. His tactical displays showed the complete disposition of the enemy fleet, and the numbers were far smaller than their projections had indicated. Intelligence estimates suggested the humans should have at least 10,000 vessels protecting their home system, yet he could detect fewer than 500. Scan for cloaked vessels, he ordered. The humans may be attempting to conceal their true strength. The hegemony's most advanced sensors swept through the system, probing every asteroid, every gas giant's ring system, every possible hiding place where human ships might be lurking. The results showed nothing except the scattered defense platforms and the retreating human vessels. Admiral, reported the sensor operator, a young Kthari whose species had served the hegemony for 3 centuries. We're detecting significant electromagnetic emissions from the human colonies throughout this sector. It appears they're attempting to evacuate their civilian populations. Zethkar manipulated his command display to show the broader tactical situation. The human colonies in 6 different star systems were indeed showing signs of massive evacuation efforts. Cargo ships and civilian transports were fleeing toward the galactic rim, carrying refugees away from the advancing hegemony fleet. Cowardice, Thexilla spat. They abandoned their worlds rather than defend them. This campaign will be over within days. But Zethkar was not so certain. He had spent too many years studying human behavior to dismiss their actions as simple cowardice. Everything he had learned about this species suggested they would fight to the last individual rather than surrender their homes. The massive evacuation efforts suggested something else entirely. They're not running from us, he realized suddenly. They're clearing the battlefield. Before Thexilla could respond, the sensor operator called out an alarm. Admiral, massive hyperspace signatures detected. Multiple fleets emerging from jump points throughout the system. The tactical display exploded with new contacts as human ships began materializing out of hyperspace. But they weren't emerging where Zethkar had expected. Instead of appearing between his fleet and Earth in a defensive formation, the human vessels were appearing all around his forces, surrounding them in a complex, 3-dimensional formation that defied every principle of defensive warfare. How many ships? Zethkar demanded, his calm demeanor beginning to crack. Initial count suggests over 30,000 vessels. Admiral, the sensor operator replied, his voice rising with each new contact that appeared on his screens. They're still emerging from hyperspace. Current estimate is rising to 35,000, 40,000. Fexilla stared at the display in disbelief. Where did they come from? Our deep space reconnaissance showed no fleet concentrations of this magnitude anywhere in human space. Zethkar was already beginning to understand. The humans had hidden their main fleet somewhere beyond the range of hegemony sensors, probably in the outer darkness between star systems. They had allowed the hegemony force to penetrate deep into human territory, then emerge from hyperspace to surround them completely. Tactical analysis, he ordered, pushing down his growing unease. Show me ship classifications and engagement ranges. The display shifted to show detailed information about the human vessels now surrounding his fleet. What he saw was unlike anything in the hegemony's military experience. The human fleet was not organized according to any recognizable doctrine. Instead of neat formations of ships with complementary capabilities, the humans had deployed what could only be described as a swarm. Thousands of small, fast vessels were accelerating toward his fleet at velocities that should have been impossible for ships of their apparent mass. Behind them came waves of medium-sized warships, whose weapon signatures suggested they carried enough firepower to destroy cities. And bringing up the rear were massive fortress ships that looked more like mobile space stations than conventional vessels. Admiral, the tactical officer reported, the human vessels are not responding to our hails. They appear to be maintaining complete communication silence. Zethkar studied the approaching formations and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in his command center. The humans were not maneuvering like a conventional fleet seeking tactical advantage. They were moving like predators closing in on prey, and their obvious intent was to overwhelm his forces through sheer numbers and close-range firepower. All ships, battle stations, he commanded, deploy in defensive formation Gamma. Prepare to demonstrate the superiority of hegemony technology and tactics. The massive alien fleet began to shift into a classic defensive posture, with the largest dreadnoughts forming the core of the formation, while smaller vessels moved to screen them from attack. It was a formation that had proven effective against every enemy the hegemony had ever faced, designed to maximize the firepower advantage of their superior vessels while minimizing their exposure to enemy attacks. But as the first human ships came within weapons range, Zethkar realized that all of his tactical training might be useless against an enemy that refused to follow conventional warfare principles. The human attack began not with the measured exchange of long-range fire that characterized most fleet engagements, but with what could only be described as a suicidal charge. The smallest human vessels accelerated directly toward the hegemony formation at maximum velocity, making no attempt to evade defensive fire. Open fire, Zethkar ordered. All batteries, target the lead elements. The hegemony fleet's plasma cannons and particle beams lanced out across space, striking the approaching human vessels with devastating accuracy. The primitive human ships had no chance against weapons that had been perfected over millennia of warfare. The first wave of attackers was vaporized almost instantly, their crude armor and shields offering no protection against the concentrated fire of dozens of alien dreadnoughts. Direct hits confirmed, reported the weapons officer. Enemy casualties, 430 vessels destroyed, no survivors detected. But even as the words left his mouth, the second wave of human ships was already entering weapons range. And then the third wave. And the fourth. How many of these vessels do they have? Fexilla asked, her mandibles clicking in agitation as she watched wave after wave of human ships die in the plasma fire of the hegemony fleet. Zethkar was beginning to understand the true horror of the human tactics. They weren't trying to preserve their forces or achieve tactical advantages. They were simply throwing ships at his fleet in endless waves, accepting catastrophic losses in exchange for gradually wearing down his defensive capabilities. Admiral, the sensor operator called out urgently. Some of the human vessels are getting through our defensive fire. On the tactical display, Zethkar could see scattered human ships that had survived the long approach and were now closing to point-blank range with his outer screening vessels. What happened next defied everything he thought he knew about space warfare. Instead of attempting to engage in conventional combat, the human ships exploded, not from damage caused by hegemony weapons, but deliberately. Each ship detonated its own reactor in a brilliant flash that vaporized everything within a considerable radius. The explosions were so powerful that even hegemony ships with their advanced shields and armor were severely damaged or destroyed outright. They're using their ships as weapons, Thexilla said in horror. They're deliberately sacrificing themselves to damage our vessels. Zethkar watched in growing alarm as more human ships broke through his defensive perimeter and detonated themselves next to his vessels. The tactic was insane by any measure of civilized warfare, but it was also devastatingly effective. Each human ship that reached his fleet could destroy or cripple at least one hegemony vessel, and sometimes more. All ships, increase defensive fire concentration, he ordered. Focus on stopping the suicide ships before they can reach our formation. But even as his fleet adjusted its tactics, the nature of the human attack was changing. The waves of small suicide ships had been merely the opening phase. Now larger human vessels were approaching, and these were not attempting to ram his ships. Instead, they opened fire with weapons that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics. Streams of kinetic projectiles poured from the human ships in quantities that should have been impossible to generate or maintain. Each human vessel was firing thousands of rounds per second, creating clouds of metal that overwhelmed even the most sophisticated point defense systems. Behind the kinetic rounds came missiles that split into multiple warheads, energy weapons that pulsed in patterns designed to overload shield generators, and exotic weapons that seemed to bend space itself. Damage report, Zethkar demanded as his flagship shuddered under the impact of human weapons. Multiple hits to the forward sections, came the reply. Shields at 60% and declining. The humans are concentrating fire on our largest vessels. The tactical display showed the true scope of the battle that was now raging throughout the system. What had begun as an orderly defensive action by the hegemony fleet was rapidly degenerating into a chaotic melee as human ships swarmed around and through the alien formation. The humans showed no regard for their own losses, no concern for conventional tactics, and no interest in preserving their forces for future engagements. They fought with the desperate fury of a species facing extinction, and their willingness to sacrifice everything was gradually overwhelming the technological superiority of the hegemony fleet. Admiral, the communications officer reported, we're receiving distress calls from 17 different vessels. The dreadnought Kethmore reports that they've been boarded by human assault teams who refuse to surrender even when mortally wounded. Zethkar felt something approaching panic as he realized how badly he had underestimated his enemy. The humans were not fighting a conventional space battle. They were fighting a war of annihilation where victory was more important than survival. Signal the fleet, he ordered. All vessels are authorized to use maximum firepower. Ignore rules of engagement restrictions. These humans must be stopped regardless of the cost. The hegemony fleet began employing weapons that had been banned by galactic convention for centuries. Planet-killing plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, and gravitational weapons that could tear apart entire formations of ships. The firepower being unleashed was sufficient to sterilize entire star systems. Yet still the human attacks continued. For every human ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. For every tactical advantage the hegemony gained, the humans found new ways to turn their technological inferiority into a weapon. When their ships were disabled, they rammed them into alien vessels. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as projectiles. When their crews were killed, automated systems continued the fight. Admiral, the tactical officer called out in alarm. The human fortress ships are approaching from the rear quarter. They're moving to surround our formation completely. Zethkar turned to see the massive human battleships advancing through the chaos of the battle. These were not the crude, expendable vessels that had led the attack. These were the core of human military power, bristling with every weapon their species had been able to devise. And they were not attempting to destroy his fleet quickly. They were positioning themselves to ensure that none of his ships would escape. As the human battleships reached their positions and opened fire with weapons that matched and sometimes exceeded the firepower of his own dreadnoughts, Zethkar finally understood the true nature of the trap that had been set for his fleet. The humans had never intended to fight a defensive battle. They had lured the greatest military force in hegemony history deep into human space for one purpose only: to destroy it completely and ensure that no word of human capabilities would ever reach the hegemony's homeworlds. This was not a battle for survival. It was an execution,